Is this readable, or should I close the blinds? All right. Is that better? All right, so let's get started. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hope everybody had a nice lunch. So we just finished doing all of our CRUD for users, right? So we can do get users, get a single user, create, and update and delete. And we also have a call where we can get a single user, right, by passing it an ID. But what happens if we pass an invalid ID? We get a 500 internal server error. And so if we look at the error that's console logged, it says cast error, cast the object ID failed for value as diff at whatever, whatever. So what does that possibly mean? Any guesses?
It means that it tried to cast that string to an object ID type.
Yeah. Exactly. So it tried to cast asdiff to an object ID. It didn't work, and it errored. And so we have to add one more error check to make sure that we query for an object ID that works. And so if you go and grab this code that I wrote, it's a regex that will check to make sure a string fits to what an object ID string should look like. And so we can go edit which file. Anyone? Not quite the coupon API, but the controller file itself. And so anytime we're going to search for like query by rec.params.id, we're going to have to make sure that rec.params.id is a valid ID. So how would we do that? Well, this code. And so match will return true or false. True if it's a match, false if it's not a match. And then we want to make sure that it is a match. So this is just, it looks a little cryptic, but it's just regex that matches for an object ID. And so we'll do something like if rec.params.id.match. So if that is true, we're all good. But if it's not true, then what? What might we want to do? Yeah, return an error. So return res dot status. What status should we use? Probably 400, which means bad input. Dot send invalid ID. And so now we're going to have to do this for every single time we ever pass in an ID. That seems a little inefficient, right? So can anybody think of a possible solution that we could do to check every single request to see if the parameter ID might not be an object ID? Yeah, exactly, middleware. So Barty, you're correct, and you said that we should edit the API file, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And so let's go ahead and edit the coupon API file and add some middleware. And so there exists this middleware where if you read the documentation, there exists this thing called app.param, which as a callback trigger to any route parameters, and it'll allow you to do some things and like validate the parameters before it gets passed to the next middleware. And so we're going to go ahead and use this. So it looks like we can do app.param, some parameter that we want to check on, give it a function that takes recres rec, res, and next, and then one more called ID, so just whatever the value of app.param.user is, and then you can do whatever you want with it, and then pass it to the next middleware in the chain. And so we're going to go ahead and use that. So app.param, whatever. And what's the name of the parameter that we want to check? ID. And then we're going to give it a callback function. And what do we want to do within this? So again, rec.param means every time we want to feed in a parameter, and so this colon something down here, it'll run through this middleware automatically. And so what can we do in this middleware? Exactly, validate the ID. So go ahead and stick in, if not ID.match, because the last parameter in this callback function will be the value of that parameter. Then we can go ahead and do the return res.status 400.send invalid ID. And are we good? Are we missing anything? No? And so now we can delete it from this getUserID call because we're already checking it. We don't need to check it again. And go ahead and run this code. And so now, theoretically, if we try to do /user/asdiff, invalid ID. So it caught that request. And if we now try to do delete or put users-addiff, it'll also reject because that /ID, the colon ID, the parameter will get caught by that middleware. Make sense? So what if we now pass it a valid user ID? Send, loading. So every time you get a really long loading, what have we possibly forgotten to do? Yeah. Yeah. Respond. And so can anybody find the bug in our code? Yeah. So there's a bug somewhere in Coupon API. Does anybody know what it is? Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't finish the if. What did I forget? Yeah, so else, if it works, what should we do?
Next.
Yeah, call next. So we can do else, do next. So that just now says, all right, pass it to the next middleware, which is presumably one of these routes. Make sense? Anybody confused?
No. Doesn't know which route to, or like what's the next middleware?
Yes, so the question is, how does the request know what the next middleware is? And so it actually pretty much just reads down this file. And so if for every request, the first thing that happens is if you're running in dev mode, we'll have added this logger, and so it'll run the logger. The next thing that we called app.useOn is body parser, and so the next middleware is body parser. Then the next middleware that we add to the app is this one here. And so this one calls next when it's done, and so it'll run down the file and see where's the next middleware, app.get. And so if it works with any of these, then that's the next middleware that'll be invoked. And if any of these call next in them, then what happens? It'll probably run into this one, which will create a 404 error, which calls next error. And the next middleware is this first error handler, which does console.log oops, then calls next error again. And what's the next middleware? This one here. and this one finally sends the response. Does that make sense? Is anybody still iffy on middleware? Yeah.
Why do you have two different error handlers, one for the sending the message and one for like sending the status?
So the question is, why do I have two separate error handlers? And the answer is just to show you guys that you could have multiple ones in a row, just as a demo. You would probably not actually do this in real life because there's no reason to. Was everybody pretty clear on how middleware works? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess like in line 56 or 50, for example.
Yeah.
Like what's that call that's being made?
Next error. So when you declare middleware, it has a callback function which has access to three things, which is the request object, the response object, and those are the things that you play with to either get at things in the request or return things in the response. And then next, which is a link to the next middleware in the chain. And so when we call next, we can either call it without any parameters, which means just go to the next middleware, or we can pass it an error. And if we do pass it an error, then it'll just run down until it catches a error handler.
I mean, in effect, does that just tell the interpreter to keep reading line by line? Like the way you described it is like just reading through the file.
So yeah, you can think of it as the request just running down the file. And so the middleware chain gets created in whatever order you declare it in. And so if you had done something like this, because this catches almost every single call, then you'll never be able to access any of the middleware below. Just because it's at the top of the chain, and the first thing it does is return. And so none of these will ever get called. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so we finished our controller for users, and so let's now work on our controller for coupons. And so we'll cd into our controllers and create a new file called coupons.js. And so what's probably the first thing that we're going to do in this file? So let's compare it to users.js. And what's the first thing that we did here? Yeah, we need to import our schema, or import our model. So const coupon is require model schemas / coupon. And so now we're ready to start writing controllers for our coupons. And so let's first do, which one do you want to do first? Anyone? Create. So let's first do create. So module.exports.create coupon is a function. It takes rec res and next. And so what do we want to do first? Probably validate input, which I'll skip for now. Then what? We can just send the rec.body object directly into the schema and hope it comes out with something. And then what? Save it. That wasn't too bad. So how about, what do you want to do next? Anyone? Let's do get coupons then. So how are we going to do this one? Somebody tell me what line, what to type. Coupon dot find empty object. And then a function that takes in the error and all of the coupons and does what? What should I do here? Res.json, all of the coupons, right? And now we can do the same thing. Let's hide this. And so now what are we going to do? What function should we use here? Find by ID. And what do we pass? So do we have to do any checking, error checking, or validation on rec.params.id? No, why not? Yeah, it already ran through that validation middleware that we created, so we can now just use it and assume that it's a valid object ID string at least.
So that just checks if it's like a possible ID, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool, so now we're done with create and retrieve, read. So what next? Yeah.
So what happens if it passes like the regular expression, like it's a possible ID, but it's not actually an ID that's in the database?
So the question is, what happens if it passes through the middleware, so it's a valid, like potential ID, but the thing isn't actually found in the database? And so that's a corner case that we forgot to check. And so what would happen would be that coupon does not exist. And so what should we check to make sure? So is there any additional error checking that we should have? Yeah, so if the coupon doesn't exist, then what should we do? Yeah, 404 error. Exactly, so good call. And so to fully answer the question is, if it passes through that regex and it says it's a potential object ID, then MongoDB will query for that ID and not find anything in the database. And then what it returns after the find by ID call is it'll invoke that callback without a coupon that it gets passed. And so then we check to make sure that a coupon exists, and if not, then we'll return a 404 error. Does that answer the question? Awesome. Any questions about what we've done so far? So now let's do update. And so what do we want to do here? What was the name of that one? Find and update. And we pass it the rec.params.id. We pass it what else? Does anybody remember what the arguments are? Tiff, we're gonna. Yeah, so rec.body, so we pass it any updated changes that we want it to make. And so rec.body is the form that was passed. And then what? The callback. What did we do last time? Does anybody remember? Yeah, we passed it some configuration object that said, hey, when you update, return us the new updated object. And so that was new true, I think. Yep. And then a callback function. And so what does the callback function do? So check if there's an error. So if error, return next error. What else should we do? Yeah, make sure that a coupon was returned. And if not, what should we do? And then finally, return. And what's missing in our CRUD? Yeah, so module. Coupon dot. Does anybody remember the delete one? Find and remove. Find one and remove, or find and remove? Find by ID and remove. Find one and remove. And we pass it rec.params.id. And then a callback. So that was pretty easy, right? We could have pretty much copied and pasted all of our code from users, put it in here, and just find and replace for coupons. And so what are some other functionality that we're looking for in coupons? There must certainly be more logic than just pulling all the coupons back. What might another call that we're looking for be? Yeah, find the active coupon. So let's write that one. Let's do module exports get active coupons. So this one's going to be a little more difficult. We can't just say find everything and give it back to us. And so we'll start to have a query that it's now, I don't know, has an object that has to be matched against. And so we're probably going to use that coupon.find method, pass it something in that object, and then the callback we can go ahead and write now, which is the same thing as above. All right, so now we're going to have to create a query object. And so the way to do that is to start matching against some of the properties. And so if we wanted to match against an ID, we could do this. ID has to be some sort of ID. But that's not what we want to match against. We want to match against which parameters? And so we have maybe start date, end date, probably those two, right? And so let's give us a little bit more room here. And so we can do find date or start date has to be less than, so the syntax for that is at less than something. Let's call it new date. And we'll have to have what? Yeah, end date has to be greater than new date. And so it's a little inefficient to keep generating new dates, so we can go ahead and do that earlier. So let's do var now is now. So unfortunately, the syntax isn't quite this easy. You have to do and then fill an array with all of the and things that you want. And so this is a pretty confusing query. So we have find, and the next two things has to be true. The start date has to be less than now, and the end date has to be greater than now. So is there a corner case that we're missing? If it's on the day, but the way date objects works is they're measured in milliseconds, and so they're very, very precise. So it will always be less than if it's on the day too. Was that a hand back there?
What if you create as soon as
Then that would be valid. So that is one. But in that case, at the moment that we called get active coupons, then it would be true. So can anybody think of a corner case or a time that this wouldn't work? Is end date a required field? Does something have to expire? No. So for things without expiration dates, this would actually not grab them because end date would be non-existent. And so we're going to actually have to have some logic for that as well. So just like there's $and, there's also $or. Yeah. And so or will be an array. And so we want to check if end date is greater than now or which else? Something like end date doesn't exist, which is exists false. I'm actually have a syntax error here. So you have to wrap ors and ands in an object as well. And so this is nearly correct. But remember, we have to make sure that all coupons are first approved by an admin. And so what are we also missing? We have to make sure it's approved, right? And so using any of the commands that we know before, what should I add and where? Oops, another syntax error. This needs to be wrapped in an object as well. So this is a little confusing. So how about in the next 2 minutes, turn to somebody sitting next to you and figure out how we're going to finish this query. All right, has everybody discussed it a little bit? Does anybody think they know what it is? Yeah. Oh, who are you pointing to? Catherine? All right, Catherine knows what it is. All right, so what are we going to do here?
I think you could add like another object for approved date,
Mm-hmm.
and then you would have to say like the current date is later than that.
Yeah, exactly. So what Catherine said is we have to add another check for approved date and check to make sure that the date is after the approved date. And so would we put that in the and or in the or where? In the and, right? And so we can do approve date is, do we have to actually check if it's less than now? We can actually just check if it exists, right? Because if it exists, then it's probably in the past because we can't approve things for the future. But maybe we could, and if we added the functionality to approve things in the future, then we'd have to check for that. But we can go ahead and assume that if it exists, then it was already approved. Everybody got it? So this will, in fact, get us all of the active coupons. So what other things, what other functionality might we need our coupons to do? So looking forward to any functionality we may add, what else might we need to query for? What if you're an admin and you log in and you want to start approving coupons? What call would you need? There are actually 2 calls required to be able to do that. Yeah, find all the coupons that aren't yet approved. So let's do get unapproved coupons. And what would this query look like? So we can go ahead and read this callback first because we know what it's going to do when it calls back. But what is the query object going to look like? Can anybody think of something? Yeah. Is non-existent? Exactly. Exists. False. That wasn't too bad, was it? And so what is the other call that we need to be able to approve coupons? Yeah, to actually approve them. And so we'll need an endpoint for that. And so how might we do this using the calls that we've learned already? All right, go ahead and discuss it with the person next to you again for the next couple of minutes, and then... Oh, yeah, well, that was easy. Okay. So you have to just update the approve date. So what should we use? Find one and update, I think it's called. Yeah. rec.params.id. And then we can't pass it rec.body. What are we probably going to pass it? What do we want to update? Yeah, approve date now becomes true. Now. And then a callback. And so this one, since we're querying for one, we also have to check to make sure that the coupon exists. And then we can go ahead and res dot the coupon. Yep. You beat me to my next question. So We also have to make sure that we tell Mongoose to return the new updated object. So that would be the new true. All right, is there anything else that we need to do with coupons? I can't really think of anything. So I think we're good to go. So now what's our next step? We already wrote all these functions. Can we just start testing them? Yeah, we have to create the routes, define the routes. And so let's go ahead and do that. So we'll need app.get coupons. We'll point to which function? What did I call it? Get all coupons. So now it's a design choice. Do you want to point this to get all coupons or only the active ones? Active, all? All. Let's use all for now so we can test it just to make sure that all of them works. We'll also need app.get a particular coupon. App.post. And app.delete. So are we all good to go? What happens if we run this file? Yeah, we haven't included our controller yet, so we have to go do that. Now are we done? Probably, I think. And so let's try running it. Syntax error. Oh, these also have to be wrapped in an object. So all queries have to be wrapped in objects in order for Mongoose to be able to parse them. Everybody got it? So the and has to be wrapped in an object, which it is out of here. Then and is an array of objects. And so here's the object with the start date. Here's the object checking approved date. Here's an object wrapping another or, which is an array that has an object that checks the end date and another object that also checks the end date. So this is probably the most complicated query that we'll have to write. Does everybody have it? And so the way to parse a single function for any syntax errors is you can just run the function as a standalone script. So if I do node coupons and nothing gets outputted, that means we didn't make any other syntax errors. And so we can go ahead and start the server. And it's running. And so now let's test the things that we've written. Was everybody able to get their thing running, or do you want me to push the code? Push. All right, so go ahead and pull that code, resolve any conflicts, and I'll give you a few minutes. Yeah?
So, wait, what do you say, like, if you just want to replace it, it's get checkout origin /master?
Yeah, so say you just want to overwrite all of the code that you wrote with the code that I wrote. You can go ahead and do a git pull that will pull things. Presumably you'll have some conflicts. Or you can run a git fetch, actually. Git fetch will fetch the repository without actually trying to merge. And then, assuming you're in the root directory, you can do git checkout origin master, a single file, and it will grab that file from my repository, pretty much, and overwrite yours. So if you want to just selectively pull without merging or anything, you can go ahead and pull one at a time. Just make sure you run git fetch first. So get that, do that, then so those three commands. So git fetch is the one we haven't talked about before, and what it does is it updates your local copy of my remote repo. And then you've seen the checkout before, and checkout origin master means checkout from my remote repo this one file. So is anybody having any trouble with that? And that's right after the git fetch.
After I do git checkout origin master.
With that file. Yeah, so make sure you give it a file, otherwise it'll try to actually just check out the whole commit. Is this working for everybody? A little bit? Beware, because it will actually overwrite your file, yeah?
How many errors with like pass spec and then that like coupon.js without matching the file?
Are you in the controllers directory? Everybody able to do that? What's your error? Throw error. Interesting. Oh, so the Git stuff worked, and now you just have to make sure your Mongo thing is running. And so let's do a quick aside. So it's a kind of a pain in the butt to make sure your Mongo instance is running every single time you start your script, right? And so to remember what we might do if there's a certain number of commands that we want to run every time we want to do something in one of our npm projects. Exactly. So if you remember, part of package.json is a scripts object, which allows us to save scripts that we might want to run. And so let's check out package.json. There should be, did I add a couple scripts for you? The build and start? Well, you might also want to consider adding another one that starts your Mongo every single time you want to run the API. And so I added one called dev, which does mongod, the Mongo folder, or the conf file. Single and means spin off another thread, and so it'll do that in a separate thread. And then node coupon API.js will start it.
What is, that's environment syntax and what, like in bash scripting?
Yeah, so if you do a single and after any bash script or bash command, it'll run it in a separate thing. Yeah.
I'm still getting a throw error even though I updated it.
So make sure you actually start Mongo.
People fold your code, then like their conf files are just messed up again, like the path is messed up. Right?
Oh, shoot.
I mean, like the other directory should be fine, it's just changing the user.
Yeah. So make sure if you have a git conflict in your conf file that you don't actually override it with mine, otherwise it'll look in the wrong directory. And if you accidentally override it, let me know, and you can just git check out an older version of it. What? Okay, so you can do git checkout. So if you accidentally overwrote your conf file with my conf file, then you can, has everybody copied this yet? So if you want to check out an older file of yours, so if you accidentally overwrote your conf file with my conf file, you can do git checkout capital head caret, which means my previous head in that one file. And it should check out the last commits worth, assuming you made a commit. Okay, good call. So this is only for people who overwrote their file with my file. You can look at it, and if it has my path, then it probably overwrote, and if it has your path, then you're good to go. Yeah?
What was the point of CRUD coupon? Like, it looked like the same as update.
It's very similar, but it allows you to just, it's hard-coded that it's going to add the approved true rather than taking other parameters as well. Does that make sense? So you can approve a coupon through the update coupon function, but we just added a separate function just for explicitly approving it. And so now, if you added that to your package.json and say you forget to run your mongod, then you can do npm run dev and see it ran this and is running this now. Does that make sense? Does it work? Yep. Does that make sense to everyone? So NPM scripts are totally optional. You don't have to do this, but I find it convenient to not have to remember to start Mongo every single time I want to run my script or run my server.
When you have the end in there, will it run these in two separate terminals?
It'll run it in a single one. So, yep. Yeah, so the question is, normally you have to run MongoD in a separate terminal, which is true because if I run MongoD, then it just kind of sits here and waits. But if I spawn off another process, so do the same thing but have an and after it, it'll run it in like a hidden terminal pretty much. And it's just telling you the process ID of that is this. And so,
It runs first thing.
yeah, so whatever precedes that and. And so if you did that and then you want to run another command like echo, then this command before the and will spin off and run in a separate script or a separate process. And then the next command will just execute.
And then notice that you said kill and stuff like that, so you have to separately.
Yeah, so you'll have to later on go kill that. And so the way to do that is you could just do kill all MongoD, and it will look up anything called MongoD and kill it. And so in my package.json, if you run npm run mongo kill, it'll kill Mongo. And there's no, I wish there were, but there's no way to have it automatically close when you kill the script. Like when you kill the dev script. Does that make sense? So this is not mandatory, but I find it helpful. Akshita, are you running into a problem? What is it saying?
Unexpected D for dev in the package.
Unexpected deep for dev? What?
Oh. Yes, I think.
All right. I forget. This was an aside to something, but I forget what we were doing before the aside. Oh, we were going to run it. Yeah, we're going to test our stuff. So now we can start our server and our MongoD thing if we want to run npm run dev. Huh? Yay. Good feeling. Don't worry if you're having troubles. Like, for me, I was like pulling my hair out trying to figure out how to do this the first time.
Did you learn all this or still?
Yeah. It took a while.
Just like Googling stuff, or how did you?
Googling, reading, trial and error.
When did you do it? Like during the semester?
The last year or two. So I'm trying to fit like 2 years of learning into like 3 days for you guys. So we are moving very, very fast. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So the question is, what's the difference between the localhost, like DB URL, and the localhost URL for your node server? And so the answer to that is that you actually have two servers running on your computer right now. One is the node web server that you created, and one is the MongoDB server that's running. And so each server, all it does is receive requests and return responses. But you need to tell it where to listen to, and the way to do that is to define a port. And so ports are just like, I'm trying to think of an analogy for what a port is. Imagine, like, we're looking out the window there to WIG, and that's WIG, right? And see, there's a bunch of windows out there, right? And say I wanted to wave to one of my friends, and I could only look at a given number of windows. My friend needs to tell me, hey, by the way, I'm in this window. So if you want to wave to me, wave towards that window. And so that's the way that computers and ports work. And so MongoDB says, hey, if you want to talk to me through this window, through port 5000. And so when we define our database URL, we're saying, yo, use localhost, which is your own computer, at this specified port. So it's like saying, yo, go to WIG whatever, and wave to this window. And so our Mongo script is running at port 5000, and our Node script is running on the same computer, just at port 3000. Did that answer your question? Cool. And so they can go ahead and talk to each other by using those URLs as well. And so that's why we pointed Mongoose over to localhost 5000. Yeah.
If you had two separate servers, like at your home, for example, they would maybe share an IP or no, like if they use the same router.
Yeah.
Then would you need to use two different ports to refer to those two servers? Is that what you're
Okay, so question is, say we have two servers running at home sharing a router. And so if you took CS50, you should understand that the router exposes a single public port. And so that is an example of what's called a cluster, or like a server farm, where you're exposing a single IP, but there are multiple servers that are load balancing. So if you have a lot of load, you can kind of split it up. I don't want to get too far into it, but there are certain programs that do that automatically, like Nginx, or I believe Node might have it built in. But it would be exactly what you think it does. There's a single IP, request comes in, and then it says, all right, send it to this server or this server. And so there's a different program that listens and does that. Any other questions about ports, server-related stuff like that? Cool. So now we have both running. We have this MongoD command starts our Mongo server running. MongoD stands for Mongo daemon, which a daemon is just something that runs in the background. And then we have our coupon API that's running. And so now we can go ahead and use Postman to submit requests. And so if we try to get users, it works. Now let's try to test coupons. Oh, I have a bunch of stuff from testing earlier. Let me delete that. All right, so now if we do get coupons, it'll be empty. And so now let's try to add a coupon. I foresee a bug. What directory am I in? So we have it, we have posted by forced to be required. And so for now, let's make it not required. So does everybody understand what I just did? So before it required that we give it like a user that it was posted by, and I'm just commenting that out for now since we don't have that functionality yet. And so the three things that are required, oops, there's a syntax error. If you pulled mine, this should be required. And that's the name, URL, and company name. And so we'll have to make sure to pass those in when we submit our request. So does everybody understand the bug that I just fixed? Cool. Yeah, so before, when we were running our server, we had our coupon schema that had a property called posted by, and it's of type schema object ID, which refers to a user, and we're saying it's required. And so when we try to create a new coupon, if we don't pass it a posted by, then it's going to error. And so since we didn't add that functionality in our API yet, I'm just commenting that out so it doesn't error.
Could you change required to false?
We could, yeah, that would work as well. Yeah, easy solutions. Oh, come on. But yeah, I commented it out so it's easy to remember what we did. And then make sure if you were using my schema, there's a typo where this said required, and it should said required. Yeah.
When we do npm run dev,
Uh-huh.
like what's different between that and like when before we did just like node coupon dash?
So the question is, what's the difference between running npm run dev and just running node coupon API? And I'm just repeating for the mic. And the answer is, we're just making explicitly sure that the Mongo server is running. And so by making sure that every time we do npm run dev, it runs this command that starts the Mongo server. That's just making sure that we don't forget. But other than that, there's no functional difference. And so we can now go ahead and run it. And try to add a coupon. So we're posting to coupons, and what were the 3 things we needed to remember? Name, URL, and company name. All right, cross your fingers. Oh. It should be is modified. User, this dot is modified. So got to fix another syntax error. So this should be that this dot is modified. Line 31 if you're using my schema.
Could you show what you changed?
Yeah. So in line 31 in /model/schema/coupon.js, this used to say this is modified, and it should say this dot is modified. And so now, hopefully, we got a 200 OK. Woohoo. Oh, wipe the sweat off. So did that work? Hopefully. How do we check if it worked? We run a get, and we see that it did indeed run. And so what are the other ones that we might want to check? Update. So let's try to put that. And so this is now uh, 404 not found. Did I forget to do put? Oh, good call, good call. So we now want to update the name, and we got a 200 OK, and it updated our name. Nice. So our put works. What was the last one? Delete. It says OK. And it looks like it did delete. Nice. And so let's go ahead and try out or test the other two functions that we created. Do you remember what they were? Yeah, so get the unapproved ones, get the approved ones, and approve something. So for testing, we can go ahead and just break REST protocol. So we can do app dot because there's not really an approved object.
What would you do in that scenario where you have two routes? Like, if you were doing this RESTfully, where you have like two different types of functionality that you want to have at that route?
Yeah, so question is, what do we do in the case, in this exact case, where we have multiple things that should be in the same route? The answer is it's kind of a design choice. The way I chose to do it was to do something similar to this, and so just add a /unapproved, but that's really your call as the designer of the API. And so, all right, just making sure the names matched. All right, and so we can go ahead and start testing these as well. And so we had get the unapproved ones. Oh, first we should insert one. So in Postman, if you have a history and you can rerun old ones. And so let's rerun the post, which saves our old body. That worked. And now we can try to do get unapproved. Oh, so what's the error here? Not quite. Invalid ID. So what's happening? Yeah.
It thinks you're passing an ID.
Yeah, because remember exactly. Yeah, so we have a route that's called coupon/ID. And so this assumes that, oh, he meant unapproved is the ID. And so how do we remedy this? Yeah, so throw it above it. That's the correct answer.
Is that honestly what people in the industry do? They just move things around.
Well, this is what we should have done in the first place, but yeah.
It sounds kind of like dangerous, right?
What?
It sounds like really inefficient. Like, I don't know. Like, it doesn't sound like a really good design idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's no way around that. So if we want to be able to add this like wildcard, then we have to make sure that any non-wildcards get caught first. So before we were like this, and so when we tried to access this endpoint, which was /coupon/active, it actually got caught by this one first. And so we would have to move these above. So now we can save this and rerun it. And this time, we got it. And so let's see if it's an active coupon. Nope, we got no active coupons back. And so how do we now want to approve it? So we have to grab its ID. And what did I call the endpoint? Approve? Put? I don't remember anymore. Yeah, so if we do put coupon/ID/approve, it will now say approve date is right now. And so now a sanity check to make sure that our unapproved coupons isn't included anymore. What? Get. Yep, it's no longer included in the get unapproved. And hopefully, if our super long crazy query worked, it should be now an active coupon. Yay. Any questions up to this point? Anything at all? Concepts? JavaScript? So we're nearly done with our API. There aren't very many other things that we want to do. We have all the functionality for coupons. We have all the functionality for users. The only functionality we're really missing is actually sending them out. And that's something we'll do next week sometime. Sending texts out. Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I understand the idea of an API correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what we've done is we've created a framework for objects, and somebody who has access to our API can like manipulate those objects as they please and read them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the future we will build on those so those become actual like things with like more than just like a name or
Yeah, so we'll add additional functionality, but yeah, that's exactly it. So right now what we're trying to do on a very high level is keep track of our database. And so the API is our interface with our own database. So rather than you saw me like go into the rather than actually having to like code things into the database ourselves, we can just make API calls to our endpoint. And so that makes it a lot easier. And then later on, we can start adding more functionality to each of our endpoints. Does that make sense? Any questions? So now you can go ahead and meet up with your partner and start working on getting the rest of the API built out for your projects. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll go ahead and push all this code.